Hello there. Welcome to Chapter 2 in the course of Social Problems. This chapter is going to be about economic inequality. So some of the objectives, some of the things we're going to be discussing today is we're going to take a look at what social stratification is, some of the various concepts of social stratification. We'll talk about social class. We'll take a look at various types of poverty terms. When it comes to poverty, we also will discuss various demographics concerning poverty. And then we're going to take a look at a historical view of the social programs that we have here in the United States. First off, let's take a look and define social stratification. Social stratification is the hierarchical ranking of people according to their wealth, power, and prestige. Let me say that again. Social stratification. So the social strata are going to be those layers. If you take a look here, you can see this pyramid. These are the different layers. It's the hierarchical layers or the hierarchical ranking of people according to wealth, power, and prestige. So within a particular society, if you are at the top of the pyramid, you have more power, more status, more prestige, possibly more income. And as you go down through the layers, your power and your influence and status is going to be going down. So the main factor that creates these layers is inequality. So inequality is whenever some people have more resources than others. It's unequal. So that's what creates these layers in the first place, inequality. So a social stratification system could be various types of things. It could be based on gender. So for example, a patriarchal society, a male-dominated society, the males would be at the highest level. Their status and their power and their influence will be at the top, and below them would be women. If we are taking a look at a matriarchal society, a female-dominated society, then women would be at the top and they would have more power and influence over the family than men. There's also something called gerontocracy, like gerontology or geriatrics. This will be within a society where the elderly or the seniors or the elders of the family will have more power and influence than the young people below them. They are respected for their position in the family, for their wisdom, for their experience. Another example of a social stratification system would be a caste system. For example, in India, they have a caste system, even though it's becoming much more industrialized. The caste system is a closed system. It's very rigid. So you're born into a particular layer, and that is the layer or the social strata that you live in and die in. It can determine who you can associate with, the type of jobs you have, how you were taken care of when you were elderly, how you were buried. So it can determine a lot of your life. Doesn't really offer a lot of upward or downward mobility, the ability to move up or down in society. Now here in the United States, we have a social class system, and we do have these layers. At the very top, we have the upper class. The upper class is the smallest social class, but it is the most powerful. It has the most life chances or opportunities in life. So remember, at the top of the pyramid is going to be the most power, the most influence, and here in the US, the most money. Below the upper class, we're going to have the middle class. This is the largest social class here in the United States. It is shrinking. It's being squeezed. It's achieving both upward mobility, where people are moving up to the upper class, and also downward mobility, moving down to the lower classes due to layoffs, divorce, addiction. There can be a lot of variables that play into this. It could be an accident or terminal illness. Below the middle class, we have more of the working class. So the working class is going to be more blue collar individuals working in the service industry and construction. If we go back to the middle class for a moment, this is where the majority of college-educated individuals are within the middle class. They're called white-collar professionals, more salary earners, teachers, therapists, social work examples. So going back to the working class is growing larger. Some of this is due to the middle class falling into the working class. We could take a look again at such things as divorce, layoffs, but even global pandemics. Below them, you're going to have the lower class. So this is going to be the particular class that's probably going to be struggling the most with poverty. And they're going to have the fewest life chances or opportunities. So when I say life chances, these are opportunities people have to increase their wealth, power, and prestige. So what are these life chances? Well, life chances are connections. It's your educational opportunities, the type of healthcare that you're able to get, the connections that you have. All of these are various life chances that if you are at the top of the pyramid, you have more of those opportunities than people below you. Let's take a closer look at poverty in America, which is a major social problem and issue. So poverty, by definition, is having insufficient funds to meet your basic needs of life. In other words, not having enough money to meet your basic needs. A lot of times when we think about our basic needs, we think about food, water, shelter, clothing, medical care. So people who are lower income individuals or lower income families, they may be struggling just to meet the basic needs. The light bill, the water bill, paying the rent, keeping food on the table. Another term is called feminization of poverty. And this states that women or females are more likely to experience poverty within their lifetime compared to men. This is true globally. This is also true in the United States. If we take a look globally, the reason this is a major factor because the majority of the world is patriarchal, male-dominated societies. Women that live within these cultures may be discouraged from becoming educated or also discouraged from becoming employed to be self-sufficient. If we take a look here in the United States, the most vulnerable demographic is going to be women who are divorced, and especially if they are stay-at-home mothers. Those are going to be at the highest risk. Stay-at-home mothers who have experienced either a divorce or their husband or partner has passed away tend to be at the highest risk due to a lack of education or work experience. The working poor. These are going to be individuals or families that are working. A lot of them they're working long hours and they're working really hard, but their incomes are still below the poverty line. And you can work full-time, have a full-time job, and still be below the poverty line, especially if you're making minimum wage. The last one is called extreme poverty. This is probably the most vulnerable. This is going to be where individuals or families, their salaries are less than half the poverty line. Let me repeat that. Extreme poverty is whenever individuals or families where their incomes based on the number of people in the home is less than half of the poverty line, their gross income. So that means taxes haven't even touched it yet. So if we take a look at this 2023 federal poverty guideline or chart, if you take a look at a household of, say, 4, so you have a husband and wife and a couple of children. If you are the working poor, then you are making less than $27,750, and there's a good chance that you may qualify for various types of social programs, Pell Grants, Medicaid, WIC, food stamps, those types of things. If you're living in extreme poverty, though, then it would be half. Then your gross income for a family of 4 would be less than half of that. So it'd be a little bit less than $14,000. Now, living off $27,750, even here in the state of Arkansas, with your gross income, taxes haven't even touched it, would be tough. You're certainly not going to be doing very, very well taking care of a family of 4. But if you're living in extreme poverty, then your income is going to be much lower than that. And the struggle is going to be much higher. So let's take a look at some of the demographics, kind of breaking it down. Poverty based on age. The most vulnerable is going to be children under the age of 18. They have the highest percentage living in poverty. The highest number living in poverty, according to this chart here, is going to be those 18 to 64 at 21 million. It makes sense that their numbers would be higher than the others because the age range between 18 and 64 is going to be so vast. But the most vulnerable are going to be children. And the reason is that if the children are poor, then obviously they come from a family that is a lower income family as well. We take a look at marital status. These days, a lot of married couples are living off 2 incomes. And so the poverty rates are going to be some of the lowest. If you have 2 individuals that are married to each other, if they're both educated, or even if they're not college educated, if they're both working full time, their chances of living in poverty are going to go down dramatically. But take a look at the shift when it comes to single mothers. It goes from around 5% of married couples to around 23%, about 1 in 4 living in poverty. That kind of ties into the feminization of poverty that we just talked about. A lot of single mothers out there really struggling, especially if they are uneducated and if they are unemployed. When it comes to single fathers, if you take a look here, then their poverty rates are half of single mothers. Single fathers are more likely to be working full-time compared to single mothers. There's a lot of single mothers that will sacrifice time and they will take time off from work because their primary focus will be making sure that their children are taken care of. So that's going to be a factor there. Fathers are more likely to be working full-time, overtime, where a lot of single mothers, they may be working part-time, getting some help from their family to help take care of their children, or they may be taking fewer hours in order to make sure that their kids are taken care of when they come off the bus, when they get out of school. If we take a look at residents, we're going to see a distinction between poverty rates based on percentages, based comparison to poverty rates based on numbers. So when it comes to metropolitan areas, this is going to be larger cities. It's going to be a lot, they're going to have a lot more people living in poverty. So if we think of Los Angeles, California, Chicago, Illinois, New York City, large cities, oftentimes this is where we think about the homeless population. And so since those areas are so heavily populated, then they have a much higher number living in poverty compared to, say, more rural areas that are outside of metropolitan. So if we take a look at maybe rural Arkansas that doesn't have a whole lot of people, then their numbers obviously are much lower than those that are living in larger cities. But if you take a look at the poverty rates based on percentages, they flip. So if you're taking a look at the metropolitan cities that are heavily populated, they have a lower poverty rate than those in rural areas. And the reason is that there are more job opportunities in metropolitan areas. There's a lot more businesses, there's a lot more opportunity than, say, more rural areas. There's a lot of rural areas down here in the South where it can be very difficult to find good employment, especially if you're having difficulty with your vehicles. You have to drive somewhere to try to get a job. You may live in the middle of nowhere. And so jobs can be definitely very scarce. So the numbers are higher in populated areas, but the percentages are going to be lower because there's more job opportunities. And that leads us to education. That's why we're all here. So you're all here to get an education, to educate yourself and to put yourself in a better position. I'm sure you all have various reasons why you're in college. I hope that a big factor of this is not just to better yourself economically, but also to broaden your perspective of the world around you. But education does play a big factor in your social situation. If you have no high school diploma, the odds of you living in poverty are somewhere around 27%, at least 1 in 4. You can't even get into the military without at least a high school diploma or a GED. If you have some sort of high school diploma but no college, those percentages are now cut in half to around 13%. So just the mere fact of having a GED or a high school diploma puts you in a much better position than not having it at all. If you have some college but no degree, just that experience of going to college is going to bring down your overall percentages. And if you have some sort of college degree or higher, it brings it down to less than 5%. So education makes a difference, especially if you are trying to get into an industry where there is a need for what you do. So whether we're talking about computers, whether we're talking about the medical field, various technical degrees, if there is a demand for those positions and a short supply, it's going to put yourself in a good situation to be able to get a good job at a fair salary or a good salary. So we've been talking about poverty, and so let's talk a little bit about the history of social programs, because we haven't always had social programs here in the United States. During colonial America, before we became the United States, the earliest European settlers that came and created the 13 colonies, there weren't safety nets like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, Pell Grants. People had to rely on each other. Family relied on family. Neighbors relied on neighbors. Friends relied on friends. They would turn to the church whenever people were sick or poor, down on their luck, having difficulty. This was a very hard time to live. The average life expectancy was around 35 years old. A lot of people died young. The infant mortality rate was very, very high. They didn't have the vaccinations and the antibiotics that we have today. A lot of people died of communicable diseases, diseases that you could transmit from one person to another, like influenza, the Spanish flu, various types of communicable diseases, tuberculosis. So now we're going to kind of move into the 1800s, the 1900s. The United States is now established. So when I'm talking about these various social programs are programs that are created in order to benefit society. And they are funded through tax revenue, taxes that you pay, taxes that I pay. Social welfare or social programs, however you want to call it, they are typically based on two categories. They're based on need and also earned. If we're talking about need, social welfare that is needed, these are usually going to be lower income individuals or low income families. So based on their income, they may qualify for Medicaid, WIC, food stamps, Section 8, subsidized daycares, those types of things. Other forms of social welfare are based on those that are earned. An example of that would be Social Security. You pay into the system. Medicare, health insurance for those 65 and older, you pay into it. Veterans benefits, you serve your country. Now, if you're taking a look at this slide here, it says the American Red Cross. Now, the American Red Cross is not a social program. But the reason I put that there was this is around the time period where nonprofit organizations were created in order to get people to help donate money in order to start kind of helping people that were in need. Clara Barton was a nurse during the Civil War, and so she is given credit for starting the American Red Cross in 1881. This was a time of Civil War reconstruction. We had gone through the Civil War from about 1861 to 1865, had several decades of reconstruction. The United States almost literally ripped itself apart, so we had to go through this time of reconstruction. So the American Red Cross was brought together to really kind of help a lot of those Civil War veterans get back on their feet, give them the food and the help and the assistance that they needed, and is still around today, providing food, shelter, aid during natural disasters. So we have to give credit to Clara Barton for that. Another example, or one example of social programs, is going to be public schools. Public schools are a social program. They are publicly funded through tax revenue that we pay into. And the person that you see there is Jane Addams. Jane Addams is a social worker, a sociologist. She is considered and referred to as the mother of social work. She received a Nobel Peace Prize. She worked very, very hard to get children out of factories and out of assembly lines, out of the coal mines, and to get them back in school. Child labor was a serious issue in the late 1800s and 1900s during the Industrial Revolution because children were cheap labor. So she pushed really hard to get children out of factories, dangerous factories, small children, and getting them back into public schools, which became mandated in 1919. This is an example of a social program that we pay into. Moving into the 1930s, very difficult time in American history. Late 20s, early 30s, we're going through the Great Depression. Franklin Delano Roosevelt is the president during that time. So there's pressure upon his administration to deal with this crisis, just like any other president would have to deal with it. So because of this, he created what's known as the New Deal. And I'm sure you've heard of that before. The New Deal created several different social programs. Their main objective was to get people back to work, to stimulate the economy. And if people are working, then they're spending their money. And the objective was we have to pull ourselves out of the Great Depression. One example of the New Deal that came out of that is Social Security, the Social Security Act of 1935. Sociologists were involved in those roundtable discussions to help create Social Security. Social Security is a social insurance that you as the employee pay half of this tax or this insurance. Your employer or your boss, the company you work for, pays the other half. The more you pay into the system, the longer you pay into the system, the more money you're supposed to get back. Social Security was the very first old age pension. Social Security was the very first old age pension. This is going to be a supplemental income for those 65 and older to help them pay their bills, to deal with the issue of elder poverty, to help senior citizens pay the rent, pay the mortgage, pay the gas bill, put food on the table, to prevent them from becoming homeless. This came out of the New Deal. It's very important. We still have it today. Another thing that came out of the New Deal is called the CCC, also known as the Civilian Conservation Corps. And what this did is put a lot of young men back to work. A lot of them were teenagers. Back to work. And various states had different types of needs that the state needed. In Louisiana, my grandfather, as a young teenager, he planted pine sapling trees, small pine trees. They made money doing that, and that helped put people back to work during the Great Depression and to stimulate the economy. Here in our beautiful state of Arkansas, one thing that we really get to enjoy are all of our beautiful state parks. For example, Petit Jean State Park. I'm sure a lot of you in this course have gone up on Petit Jean Mountain and gone to that state park. It's quite beautiful. That was created off the backs of a lot of young men during the CCC. And if you drive through Petit Jean State Park, you will see a statue, a bronze statue of a young man. And if you go up close enough and take a look at it, it's commemorating the young men that helped build Petit Jean State Park. So when you think about all of our beautiful state parks around the state, keep in mind that the CCC was responsible for creating those that we still enjoy today. Moving into the 1940s. The 1940s was also a very difficult decade, just like the 20s and just like the 30s. So during World War II, was in the 1940s, Pearl Harbor was bombed by Japan. We had spent several years trying desperately to stay out of World War II. But once Japan decided to bomb Pearl Harbor, that was over. So that pulled us into World War II. So a lot of our young men had to leave the United States and go off and fight against Japan, Italy, and Germany. And with them gone, and not knowing how long they were going to be gone, because during that time period, they didn't have deployments. They came back home when the war was over, however long it took. So because they were gone, that left a lot of vacancies in factories that needed to be filled. And so there was pressure upon women to go into those factories. It was considered their patriotic duty to take off their kitchen aprons and to go into those factories and pick up a rivet gun and to manufacture the things that we needed in order to win World War II. So we have iconic figures like Rosie the Riveter saying, yes, we can. So we had a lot of women that went into these factories to work. This gave them not only a salary, but it also gave them independence and autonomy. And ever since then, the two-income family has risen. It's gone up. One thing that came out of World War II, which my grandfather was able to benefit from, he was able to go to refrigeration school because of this, were these veterans benefits. For example, the GI Bill, which we still have today, allows a lot of young women and men that have served our country to go to college. Good thing about the GI Bill that was happening in the 1940s was during that time, college and university was very much a luxury. The only people that really were able to go there were the people that could afford to go. So a lot of people, the working class and the poor, they were out of luck. They weren't able to. But because they served their country, they had the GI Bill, they were able to go to college. And this allowed upward mobility for a lot of poor young men and poor young women to help educate them and pull them out of poverty. Another veterans benefit, another social program, are VA home loans that veterans who have served their country, they qualify for. The good thing about these VA home loans is that they are secured by the national government. There is no prime mortgage insurance, also known as PMI, since they are secured by the government and they're backed by the government. Also, there is no money down when it comes to VA home loans. So this allowed a lot of young families after coming back from World War II to be homeowners for the first time because they didn't have to put the traditional 20% down, which a lot of poor people could not afford. Another benefit from those who served their country after World War II is veterans health care, going to VA hospitals and VA clinics. Last thing I want to discuss is something quite unique. It's called the Lanham Act. And it was only around for about 3 years, and we've never seen it since. Today, we have subsidized daycares where lower income families that may not make a lot of money, they may be able to send their children to Head Start or ABC. These are subsidized daycare where you don't have to pay as much. It's kind of based on, it's a sliding scale based on your income. With the Lanham Act, though, in 1943 to 1946, this is the first and only time in American history that we ever had universal daycare. So just like we have public schools from K through 12, where regardless if you're poor, middle class, or rich, you can go to public school for free, that's what the Lanham Act provided for daycare. And daycare can be expensive. So this provided universal daycare, and I'm sure you're already thinking why. And you probably have already figured it out. It allowed women to leave the home with small children, take their children to these daycares for free or of very little cost, and go into those factories. But as you can see, it ended in 1946. The war ended in 1945. And so by 1946, they had taken the Lanham Act away. And the reason is because now it was viewed that it was women's patriotic duty to leave the factories and go back home. Take care of their home, take care of their children, and take care of their husband. The idea also is that if they remained at the factory, they're taking a job away from a man coming back from the war who needed that job as a breadwinner to take care of his family. But like I said, even though a lot of women went back home in the 40s, they were empowered during this time. They got to see what it felt like to have independence, autonomy, to have a paycheck, and to have the independence to make choices. And that empowered a lot of women to go to college and to be career oriented. Half the workforce today, right now, is women. Used to not be that way. And it is projected as we move into the future that more than 50% of the workforce moving into the future at some point, there will be more women than men in the workforce. This leads us into the 1960s. This was a very tumultuous time in American history. There was a lot going on. John F. Kennedy, the president, was assassinated. Lyndon B. Johnson was his vice president. And so Lyndon B. Johnson was sworn in as president of the United States after JFK was assassinated. There's a lot of things going on, such as the Vietnam War, Woodstock, the hippie movement, the civil rights movements. There was a lot going on during this time. Another major issue was poverty. So again, just like with the Great Depression, there was pressure put on Franklin Delano Roosevelt to pull us out of the Depression. There was pressure to put with Lyndon B. Johnson to help deal with the poverty issue. So he created what's known as the War on Poverty. This is typically referred to as the extension to the New Deal that occurred 30 years earlier. So as you can see here, there's a lot of other social programs that came out of this. Just like with the New Deal created social programs, the War on Poverty did as well. So in the 1960s, Medicare was created. This is public health care insurance for those 65 and older. It created Medicaid. This is public health care insurance for lower income individuals and lower income families. So this helped provide insurance, medical insurance for elderly seniors and also lower income families. A huge benefit still used today. Food stamps, or SNAP. A lot of people in Arkansas benefit from this. A lot of children are not going to go hungry tonight because of food stamps. This was because of Lyndon B. Johnson. Job Corps to get people job ready. Head Start, a subsidized daycare program to help lower income families be able to afford to send their kids to daycare so they can go to college or finish high school or get their GED or go to work. Another thing that came out of the war on poverty are Pell Grants. Pell Grants are a huge benefit to a lot of lower income families that, unless they went to the military and got the GI Bill, or they scored high enough on their ACT to get scholarships, there's a lot of lower income families that simply would not have the opportunity to advance themselves and go to college. And Pell Grants have offered that opportunity to a lot of lower income families. And over the many years that I've worked here, I've seen a lot of students use Pell Grants very responsibly, and they put themselves in a very good position graduating to help give their families a better life. The last thing that came out of the war on poverty is called HUD, Housing Urban Development Loans. So this is a type of loan that you would typically find in more rural areas. And the purpose of this is to stimulate migration into rural areas, to move into those areas, to get people to live there and work there and stimulate the economy. So the good thing about rural development loans, or HUD, is that just like VA home loans, there's no money down. This gave a lot of lower income families the opportunity to stop being renters and be homeowners for the first time ever. It's a huge benefit to give the American dream to a lot of lower income families. Collectively, you put all these social programs together, they reduced poverty in the 1960s from 22% to 11%. And that leads us into the 1990s. So this is President Bill Clinton. At one time was the governor of Arkansas. He's a Democrat, but he's also considered a moderate. He was the type of president that could work with people across the aisle to get things done. He is the first president in a generation that actually had a balanced budget. And he came up with what's known as the Welfare Reform Act of 1996. Prior to the Welfare Reform Act of 1996, you could be on unemployment indefinitely. There were not a lot of regulations and restrictions in regards to unemployment, so you could be on it for a long time. And so there wasn't a whole lot of incentive to get back to work because the perception was that the unemployment checks are going to keep coming in. Now, keep in mind that I'm not talking about disability checks. If people are disabled due to their age or cognitive disability or physical disability, if they're not able to work, then they may be due or qualify for disability for the rest of their lives. Unemployment is different. These are people that are unemployed. They may have lost their jobs. So the Welfare Reform Act, the whole premise of this was to do a couple of things. Number one was to give more power and autonomy to the states. So essentially what it did, it created 50 different welfare programs. The idea was that every state understands their needs better than another state. And the needs of California are going to be very different than the needs of New York State or Arkansas. The needs are going to be different. The idea was that the federal government is going to give the power and the authority to declare or to come up with what the eligibility would be for certain programs based on the needs of that state. So the eligibility obviously would be different in California versus Arkansas. The standard of living is going to be different. The incomes are going to be different. So when it comes to Medicaid, WIC, which stands for Women with Infant Children, that's that voucher, so women can or families can go to various grocery stores to get formula and other things that they need. Medicaid, SNAP or food stamps. So based on your income within that state, they set their own eligibility. So it gave more independence and autonomy to the state. Another thing it did, it put stronger restrictions on unemployment. It only allowed you to have unemployment for 24 months or 2 years consecutively. The idea is that if you can't find a job in 2 years, then that is an issue. And so they would allow you a couple of years at the most to try to find employment. And at that point, they would cut off the unemployment checks. It was believed that within 2 years, you should be able to find a job. The last thing it did, it put a lifetime cap on it. Within your lifetime, you would only be able to draw unemployment checks for a total of 5 years. Now, this could be broken up into different segments throughout your life, but collectively, 5 years would be the max that you could have unemployment checks. So our final thought in taking a look at chapter 2. And when I'm talking about these final thoughts, we're looking at it from a sociological perspective, how sociology looks at some of these things. So to better understand poverty and the effects of poverty on American citizens and globally, sociology studies poverty rates, poverty demographic statistics, who's experiencing poverty, while also critically evaluating the functionality of various social programs like we've talked about, like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, those types of programs that we've discussed in this lecture.